Everyone, today we have Soumya Vora with us, and we'll be speaking about a wide range of issues. We'll be speaking about her journey. Soumya Vora is currently the lifestyle editor for GQ India. She has worked with Cosmo and she has worked with LBB. So we'll be discussing with her journey, the issues that she's faced, the issues that she's seen, and the widespread issue of how women are treated differently than men in workspaces. So, hi Soumya,
Hi,
how are you?
Saurabh. I'm good. How are you?
I'm pretty good too. And we have with us Aditya. So, Aditya, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Saurabh. How are you, Soumya? Doing good?
I'm very good, Aditya.
Okay. Okay, so first thing off the bat, Soumya, is this something that you always wanted to do, being an editor, or was it like did you change your career paths while you were in college or
I
later
think
on?
for me, I always knew I wanted to be in media. It was something that I really cared about, and I was somebody who was a writer from the start. I loved writing. I was one of those kids who was always doing really well in English and doing terribly in all the other subjects in school, if you know what I mean. So I think that I was destined to be a quote unquote art student. And I figured that the best way to sort of turn that into a career that I can be happy with is media, and I did media in college. But no, actually, it took me a while to figure out that this was my space. I actually did a year of internships. I would highly recommend this for anybody who's trying to figure out what to do with their life. I did 10 internships in 1 year.
What? Wait, 10
10
internships in a
internships
year?
in 1 year, yes. And I did them across
Oh my God, like,
different aspects of media. So I did like an internship in PR, I did an internship in magazine with Rolling Stone, I did an internship with a newspaper called Deccan Chronicle, which is Asian Age here, I think, an internship in advertising with Mudra. I did an internship with Greenpeace, which was super random at that time, but I just basically wanted to sort of get a little working taste of everything to see where I fit best. And I think that's when I realized that it's writing. For me, it's writing, it's being an editor, it's being part of an editorial team for, a magazine that I can be proud of, or, a portal that I can be proud of. And that's why I decided to do what I do now.
So all these internships were during your college year, or is it after your graduation?
I actually took a gap year between finishing my bachelor's and doing my master's. I did a master's in film studies. But in that gap year, I sort of just filled that year up with internships so that, I knew that I wanted a second degree, but I wanted to know what I wanted to do after that. So that's when I did this whole list of internships. And it also helped me, it was good because it helped me rule out a lot of the things that I thought I wanted to work in when I was younger, like film, for example. I did an internship with Anurag Kashyap, and I realized that it's very exciting, but it's not the kind of life I can live because it's very hectic.
okay, so as of now, while I'm listening to you, it's been like everything that you've done, like over that 1 year, or the internship that you've done is like crazy good. Like, how did you even manage to land these?
I think that one thing that people don't realize is actually you could just really reach out to people by, using social media. I tweeted at Anurag Kashyap, for example, and everybody told me that he's not going to respond to you. Why would he respond to some, random 21-year-old's tweet? But I tweeted at him once more, and he did. He connected me to his producer, and his producer got in touch with me and said that we won't be able to pay you, but if you're able to come down and you want the internship, you can do it. We're working on a pilot project for a series, and I went and I was an assistant director on that set. So it started with a tweet. Similarly, in fact, funnily enough, not even internships, I got my first job because I was in Bangalore and I thought that I was, I was waiting for sort of something to happen that I was excited about. And I just wrote an email to Nandini Bhalla from Cosmo. And I wrote her a very random email, and I'm very surprised that she read it. But she didn't just read it, she read it and she said, come for an interview. And I said, I can't come for an interview, I'm in Bangalore.
Okay.
And she said, that's okay, we'll do an interview over the phone. And we did an interview over the phone, and I gave an edit test. And 3 days later, she offered me my first job.
I am at this point very impressed. I've tried a lot of cold calling, none of them seem to work. I mean, I got you on the podcast. I mean, that's one thing. Yeah, I have a couple of other people also lined up. I mean, that's the thing, but like to have this sort of mindset to get other people while you're still like 18 or 20-year old is fantastic. I mean, you managed 10 internships in a year. You've done your masters. You worked with Anurag Kashyap. And what exactly was this series? If you're allowed to.
So unfortunately, close it because it didn't get made for legal reasons. I'm not sure, but it was very exciting.
Okay.
And I worked with Gulshan Devaiya and Radhika Apte and a bunch of really great people. And I think it was very exciting because I was honestly a kid. I was 21 years old. I didn't know what I was doing, and it was honestly the most responsibility I've ever been given in my life. I was an assistant director, so I was handling actors, I was handling costumes, and I thought that I would just be running around getting people coffee, and I've been very, very blessed actually, because none of my internships have ever had me run around getting people coffee. When I was in advertising, I was allowed to, sort of brainstorm, come up with a slogan. One of my slogans got chosen, and I was allowed to pitch to clients, which is honestly, it's kudos to the companies, because there are a lot of companies that don't give interns their due. But I had the luxury of working with a lot of companies where there were a couple where I didn't get a lot of great work. I won't name those. But out of the 10 places, I'd say about 8, I was really, really given a chance to be part or feel like I was part of the team. Like with Deccan Chronicle, I wrote an article for the paper every single day. And it was... That was really exciting to me because I wanted to work. I was one of those extremely awful, annoying, geeky interns that you don't get anymore, unfortunately. Now you only get interns who are like, I'm going to sound so old, but you only get interns who are like, oh my God, I'm on Snapchat or whatever. But I was one of those interns who really wanted to work, and I was very excited about working. And I was lucky that I worked with a lot of very secure bosses who were comfortable, letting me put ideas out there, take those ideas, give me credit for those ideas, And I think that in a big way,
that's actually very rare.
In a big way shaped the kind of boss that I wanted to become as well. Because to me, it's really important that even now, till today, if somebody, tags me in an article that I was the editor for, but I haven't written, which used to happen a lot at LBB, where I was managing a larger team, I would always try and make sure that if I saw the comment, I would tag the writer who'd written it, because it's my team, but it's not my article. So I think that is something that I was very lucky to have experienced. And I know that a lot of people don't get that luxury, so I feel very lucky to have had it.
You joined Cosmo when you were when you were in Bangalore, and then you moved to Delhi.
Cosmo,
you did. How long were you there for?
At Cosmo? About 3.5 years.
What was the reason that you changed from Cosmo to the next company?
I think that what tends to happen is that no matter what the situation is, you tend to get comfortable if you know a place really well, and if you can, sort of do your job without blinking. And I think that has started to happen to me, because I really got a lot of opportunities at Cosmo. I really did. I mean, within 3 months of being there, I was being given cover stories, which is any young writer's dream at that time, And I got a lot of great stories.
Yeah.
I worked with a boss who didn't really believe in hierarchy. She was not one of those people who was like, oh, you're a child, just stay in your place. She would ask for your opinion. And very often we had differing opinions, and she would hear me out despite the fact that she didn't agree with what I was saying. So I think that allowed me to do a lot of great pieces for Cosmo. But I think that what also happened was that I felt like I needed to push myself out of this place to see if I could do something else, to make sure that I wasn't just a great writer for Cosmo. I could be a great writer or a great editor anywhere. Great is a grand term, but that I could be a capable writer or a capable editor anywhere. And another big reason that I left was because I thought that at that time, I felt like it would be the right time for me to move to digital. I wasn't comfortable with the digital space. And I knew that I needed to get comfortable with it, because I knew that it's not the future of media. It was happening right then and there. And to ignore it and to say that, I'm going to hide in the cocoon of print for a very long time, it didn't make sense. And I knew that it was a space with which I was completely unfamiliar. And that was what was very exciting about LBB.
I just want to ask you, like, how different was the experience for you in the digital and the print?
So digital was actually very, very different. It was a completely different ballpark from what I was used to. And ultimately, I'm sure, as you can tell from my trajectory, I did come back to print. But we'll get into that later. I don't regret it at all, though. I think that the thing about LBB and why it was fun and crazy and sort of a whirlwind to work at LBB was because everybody moved faster than the speed of light. It was a team of extremely fast-thinking, innovative people that I've never worked with people who worked at that speed before that or again. You know, I mean, like, they would think of a mammoth idea and they would execute it by day after tomorrow. It was like that, you know. So they would take an idea that would take the average person like 3 weeks and they would do it in 2 days.
Yeah, because I remember seeing LB grow from somewhere, like from a very few followers on social media to like kind of exploding and being everywhere. I thought like in my head that it happened in a very short span of time, like within a couple of years. Like, was it really the case, or was it like something that was long coming and like took a lot of planning to achieve?
I think that they honestly work from the perspective of making things happen pretty quickly. I'm sure that there was a long-term plan in place because both the founders, Dhruv and Suchita, are people who are always thinking long-term, like they're thinking 10 years into the future. But at the same time, they're also thinking of what can happen like super quickly to elevate something. And one thing that I found very interesting at LBB, which I had not had exposure to that much before, was how deeply they cared about the person who was coming to the site. You know, like it was literally like if one person, like, you know, I mean, also the kind of content was so different. Like with magazines, you are, you know, you're a curator of taste. It's very different from an LBB where, you know, you're very, very connected with your audience. You're talking to them. I would, you know, hold focus groups with men and sit around and try and understand, you know, like, what do you care about? What do you want to see us writing about? You know, which any big media magazine is never going to do. It simply doesn't function that way. So I think that to me was a very interesting experience, also because the kind of content we were doing was so different. Like, you know, I mean, I had never done like a 10 best Momo places in Delhi list before. So for me, I had, you know, that slight editorial snobbery that comes with, you know, like, I don't want to do this article. And it helped me really understand that, like, you can want whatever you want, but this is what the people want.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to come across an article that says 10 best Momo places in Delhi, like, even though I may not be very like in favor of somebody writing that article, I'll be very in favor of reading that article and finding out if the places I've been to feature in those lists or not. And
I think that, you know, like what LBB taught me was, for the first time, to separate myself from, you know, that writer Soumya Vora, editor Soumya Vora, and look at it as human Soumya Vora who wants to find out what the nice places to eat are. And, you know, the thing is that what happens, especially when you transition from print to digital, because print, honestly, I know that print is in trouble the world over, but I still feel like it's the purest form of writing. It really is. Like, to a writer, somebody who cares about writing, who cares about editorial, the kind of pieces you will find in print, you will be very hard pressed to find in digital. But the thing is that because you come with that degree of snobbery, you forget to realize the value that digital has and the power it holds. Like right now on social media, you have the black and white challenge. You put this in print, a month later, it's forgotten. But in digital, right now, when you talk about it, when you're the first person to break the story or uncover, you know, why are people doing this? Is it just a mindless social media challenge? It has a different kind of power, and it has a different kind of audience who might be just as intelligent but is consuming things very differently. So I think LBB really helped me understand that. It helped me sort of put aside or like try and cast off that thing of, you know, I'm too good to write like this, and realize that like there's no bad like articles, there's just bad writers. It's that simple. You can take an article on 10 momos in Connaught Place and you can make it read fantastically. And you can take a fantastic piece on like, you know, very crucial, you can take something on the Black Lives Matter movement and write it terribly. You know, content is only as good as what you make of it.
I mean, I'll come back to you on the 10 best momo places in Delhi because I'm interested to know what those. But before that, do you think somebody like Fire D'Souza has been able to capture the digital area pretty well? Because I think she left her channel, she started out something with her own. She right now is like more active on Instagram. She updates her stories there, she posts her videos there. Do you think somebody like Fire D'Souza has managed to transition
I
extremely
think
well
so. I
in this
do, and
field?
I think that at the end of the day, she's understood where her audience is and where her voice will be heard and make a difference, and she's tapped into that.
True.
The problem is that for a lot of people, they will look at, oh, is the traffic coming to our site, or am I building up a site of my own?
Mm-hmm.
But and there is that
Correct.
resistance to rely on a third party like Instagram. But Instagram is an
Mm.
extremely powerful tool, and unfortunately, in a lot of people's heads, it's been whittled down to like this space of slightly mindless fashion bloggers. I'm not saying all fashion bloggers are mindless. I'm just saying that like it's been reduced to like this parody of cute content and memes. But Instagram, I mean, I have seen Instagram start movements. I have seen somebody I know put up a post saying, hey everybody, anti-CA rally at 8 p.m. at India Gate, and I've seen 10,000 people show up because of that one post. So I feel like social media is beautiful and terrifying because it has so much power. And I feel very happy that somebody like Faye D'Souza has been able to use it to push back against a system that she didn't think was doing justice to the things that she wanted to talk about. So it's great. I think it's fantastic.
I mean, we all tend to reduce the social media as to like Facebook is for somebody who's older, Instagram is for like, as you've said, like memes and trends, and like Twitter is for only ranting. But I think if you look around all the revolutions that happen across the world, in countries like Syria, or we see Hong Kong, all of them have been like fired up by social media posts. After you worked there, LB, for how long? 3 years again, or was it longer?
LBB I was with for 2 years. For me, LBB was good. It was good because I met a lot of different people who really broadened the way I think, because you otherwise tend to meet a lot of like-minded people. And I think it's really good to meet people who disagree with you, because when you meet people who disagree with you, you see a point of view that you would never have seen because you're hanging out with the same sort of person all the time, So I think that was great. And I think that it also, like, while I was at LBB, I also looked at, their e-commerce, for example. I used to handle a lot of the content that went up for their e-commerce. Essentially, it was a very interesting and very different experience from anything that I ever thought I'd be doing. Because I mean, I'd had conversations when I left Cosmo, and I was sort of in this interim period between joining LBB. I'd already said yes to LBB, but I'd gotten into a couple of conversations with. Will not name names, but like leading fashion brands who were like, will you come run e-commerce content for us? And I was like, no, I can't see myself doing e-commerce. It's just, again, that editorial snobbery where you're like, oh, this is beneath me, which is, something that you learn over time is absolute bullshit. But at that time, I thought that, that I don't need to be doing this yet. I think that because here it was part and parcel of what I was already handling. I was still handling editorial, so it wasn't one of those things where I was, it was a complete switch. It was something I was overseeing on the side. And it just gave me so much insight. It made me understand, how e-commerce ran, and one thing I will say about LBB is that, that's what I think will, for the people who are loyalists, I think that they will stick with LBB and they will shop from LBB, because I saw the level of concern for each person who ordered from the website was unreal. Like, Amazon honestly doesn't give a shit if like your order comes broken or torn or whatever it is. Like, they'll at best, if you raise enough of a hue and cry, they'll refund it or something, right? But with LBB, at least while I was there, like if you got, say for example, you ordered a jar of peanut butter and the label was coming off and you wrote a comment about it, the founder would know about it and she'd be like, we have to send them a replacement jar of peanut butter because how could this happen? So I think that's really nice, and that's possibly what happens when an editorial portal crosses over into something like e-commerce. You're so used to caring that caring continues. But I think that for me, I just realized that I missed the pure editorial space, and I wanted to be in a space where I was writing long form again, and I missed print, to be very honest, and I wanted to be in a space where I could do both, which is why, when I had the conversation with GQ, it just made sense. Like Condé Nast was always something that, I mean, if you're in lifestyle and you're in journalism, Condé Nast is the bar, and it's something that you eventually want to have. It's like something you really want to have done, because it's the epitome of places to work. So I was excited about it. I was excited about the idea of being primarily print again, and being able to be in digital enough as well.
So for how long you are associated with GQ?
I've been at GQ for a bit over a year now.
Okay, so you were first in print, then in digital. Now you are in print, but again you have the capability with digital. You were in the digital era when it was growing, so you have seen everything about it. And now that you are back in print, is there something that you want to change in print that you have learned from the digital to make it more powerful, so that it can compete with the ongoing digital demand?
To be very honest, I feel like the two spaces and the two audiences are still fairly different, but I think what makes a big difference is the brand. Like the person who's reading GQ, they might read something very different or care about something very different in GQ print, and they might care about something very different in GQ digital. And I do believe that the GQ digital audience is wider, simply because the reach is larger. To be able to get print magazine, you either need to subscribe to it, or you need to go online and find a PDF at your newsstand. But digital is a click away. Somebody sends you a link and you click on it. So for GQ, at the end of the day, no matter what it is, there are certain things we simply won't put up on digital, no matter how good, the hits are or whatever it is. Like celebrity gossip is something that we don't put up. Like you'll never hear, oh my God, are Saif and Kareena fighting? That is not something you will ever see on GQ, because it's not.
So we can't see any Taimur put on GQ.
Unfortunately not, no. But for a lot of people, that is their bread and butter, and it makes sense. But for us, at the end of the day, we know that curation is a big reason that somebody is coming to GQ. You're coming because you don't want what a celebrity gossip portal will give you, because I can get that on a celebrity gossip portal. But that if we curate a list of 10 whiskeys for you, we've done our research. If we're telling you that these are like 10 whiskeys that are fantastic, that are from have been approved by a whiskey sommelier, right? That they're going to be quality whiskeys you can buy under, like, say 5,000 or 2,000 or whatever it is. So it's not like we'll be alienating and say that, here's a list of great whiskeys, but all of them are 25,000, so good luck. We know that the digital reader wants to know that, is this something I can afford?
Right.
And there are budget ranges, So while you won't do list in print, you won't do a whiskeys under 2K list in print, but on digital, it makes perfect sense. Like we will talk to the right people, we will use our own expertise, we will do our own research, and that is something that somebody is coming here for, because they know that somewhere else you might just have a list of like 10 whiskeys that fall under this price point, but nobody's going to vouch for them. Nobody's going to go to bat for them.
Yeah, so do you think the way New Yorker has gone about it, they are now earning far more in digital revenue than they are in the print? Do you think GQ would go the same way in future? The way New Yorker has gone?
The way of the New Yorker? To be very honest, I actually have no idea. If you'd asked me this question 6 months ago, I may have had an answer of some kind. But the one thing that a post-COVID world has taught me is that we don't know what's going to happen next week. So I have no idea. Because honestly, I'm really happy and proud that we took out print editions in June and July, when pretty much every other magazine had stopped printing. We were one of the few magazines that put out print issues. So, it it really shows you that like you know nothing, Jon Snow. You know, like it can, you know, you may have thought that like how are magazines even coming out right now, but we got our subscribers copies. They didn't miss the June or the July issue. I feel like it'll be very important to just maintain that brand value, because there's always going to be a lot of pressure to try and cave to like, you know, something that will get you more traffic. And that pressure is especially harder with digital, because with print, I think a lot of, you know, advertisers and stuff understand that the curation is exactly what makes print content what it is. So nobody's going to push you to try and do a certain kind of story. But with digital, I think it becomes a harder battle to fight, because there are certain things that are like low-hanging fruit. Celebrity gossip is one, airport looks are another, anything with Bollywood will work. But even being, and it's not like GQ doesn't do Bollywood, but they'll do Bollywood in a GQ way. That becomes really important. More than digital, more than print, it becomes being able to hold on to what people come to you for. Because if you're going to try and be like everybody else, then you're just going to be another one of like 30 links that turn up when you type in an SEO keyword. And it's really important at this point, I think, brand identity, whether it's people, whether it's somebody like, why do you know Faye D'Souza and why do you not know like 5 other people who are doing the same thing that she's doing? It's because she's built a brand identity. She's built credibility. She's built reliability. You know that you can trust her, whether it's because of her background or whatever it is. And, you know, I think that becomes the most important thing right now, more than how popular you are, or more than, even if you have like 5,000 followers or if you have 10,000 followers and those followers think your word is gospel, I think that counts for a lot more than having reach.
True. So do you think like, so you've worked for approximately 6 years now, and counting your experience in internship, probably 7 years. So, so the thing is that you've seen a lot of industry. I'm primarily from IT, Aditya is primarily from IT. But I think one thing that is common across every industry that we see or think about is that the women are not getting the due that they deserve. You would have interacted with a lot more people in various industries, various sectors, various companies. Do you think that this is an issue that is widespread, or is it like slowly coming down?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, it's not slowly coming down. To be very honest, I've worked in 2 organizations where I had a female boss, and in one organization, I'm in a space where my opinions are respected. So I have been lucky that I've had bosses that have not made me feel this way. But at the same time, I mean, I've been in lots of external situations where, you know, in work external situations, whether it's a review somewhere or whether it's, you know, a client meeting or whatever it is. And me and several people I know have definitely been treated differently because they're women. And sometimes I think men also think that they're doing it in a positive way. But I will be very honest, I have heard, you know, I mean, I have, for example, I remember once having called a meeting and being asked if I was an intern at that meeting. So I called this meeting when I was at an editor level, and an external person, not from the company, who'd come to the meeting, you know, was like, "Can you bring me some coffee, sweetheart?" And I was like, "Okay." Wow. And
so that's blatant sexism right there.
You know, it's funny because technically I'm in one of the most progressive spaces that there is. You assume that journalism is progressive, and it is definitely more progressive than a lot of other spaces. It is also like it's a good thing that a lot of the spaces I've been in have been very women-led. Like, I've not just worked with women bosses, I've also had very women-centric teams. So that's made a big difference. Touch wood, I've not had too much exposure. So I know a lot of friends who've been in male-dominated spaces, and they've definitely had those experiences. I know a female lawyer who, you know, I mean, is constantly shut down, is constantly, you know, mansplained to in her job. And she's extremely bright, you know, somebody who hasn't been to an Ivy League, but she's been to something in the vicinity of an Ivy League, you know, so one of the top colleges of the US. And I mean, it's not like her opinion doesn't count, but it always comes with, like, there will be people who interject her and say, you know, I think what she's trying to say is, which is something that's happened to me as well. You know, like when a man cuts you off and they're like, oh, I think what she's trying to say is,
That's not a good thing. And also, like, as I say, women workforce participation in India is declining. A decade before, it was 31%. But as of now, it's near 20 to 23% only. If we journalize this thing, then what do you think would be the like structural issues that keep women away from the workforce?
I think it's a lot of things, but the two top things that come to mind are safety and family pressure. I feel like for a lot of women, a big thing that tends to happen is that work is supposed to take a backseat to raising a family for a lot of women. And for me to say this, I have to really pull myself out of the lens of the social strata that I currently belong to and I associate with. Because most of the people I know have the luxury of, very supportive, very positive parents who will be like, of course you should work, you must work. But for a lot of people who are, the working middle class, it is really problematic that for a woman, a career is great as long as it doesn't interfere with the primary life goal of having kids, raising a family, being around for your husband, and like, which is why you'll find that there will be certain women that will work until they get married, or they will work and then they will find a version of their job that pays them a lot less or allows for a lot less growth, but they can manage the hours with having kids at home or having in-laws at home or whatever it is. And I think that's definitely something that gets in the way, because it doesn't work the other way around. You don't see men having to cut down on their hours because they have a child now. It's the woman who's supposed to traditionally be around and take care of things. So I think that definitely becomes a consideration, and a lot of women, will sort of enter the workplace less because they feel like, this is expected of me. For a lot of people, they will fight back. They will have the luxury to be able to fight back and to be heard. But for a lot of people, the pushback is going to be too severe to be able to handle. And they will end up saying that, it is simply easier to have or to let my career fall to the wayside so that I can focus or concentrate on this and look at the man as the primary breadwinner. For people who don't have that concern, I think safety definitely in India, to be very honest, that we have no labor laws. But I think that in this country, if you're needed to like stay overtime or, do late nights and stuff like that, it definitely does become a consideration when A, you're a woman, and B, when companies are hiring women, because you know that you're automatically, like when I worked at India Today and I had late nights, because it was a women-centric company. Cosmo was primarily all women with like maybe 2-3 men in the mix. They had cab services that were safe and took you from, because our office was in Noida, which is not particularly safe at night, and it took us from Noida to wherever we lived, and there would be a guard in the cab with you who would be with India Today. If you had been gone for too long, the head office would call you, and they would check to see where you were. And if you got home and your house was in like an alleyway, for example, which one of my friends' houses was, the guard would walk you to your doorstep. And that's the level of protection that women need in this country, and most companies are not willing to give it. I think that makes women afraid. That like, would I have been comfortable staying all those late nights at India Today if I had known that there wasn't going to be a cab that took me home at 2 a.m. and I felt safe? Yeah, probably not. I don't think I want to take an Uber from Noida to wherever at 2 a.m. And it's not about anything apart from the fact that I simply will not feel safe. And if that was the situation, I may not have taken the job. I may have said, oh, this requires late nights and I can't come back by myself. It's easier for me not to do this.
Right. All these factors are like pushing the women to stop working towards their career and start thinking about the family and other things, right?
I can't make a general statement and say that that's the case for all of the women, but I do feel like the pressure to start and take care of a family is a lot more on women than it is on men in terms of work. I'm sure men deal with, oh my God, you are XYZ years old, you should be married. But it's like for a man, it's like an event in your life. You get married and then you go back to work. But for women, it's a turning point. It's when you make decisions about, are you going to stay home? How does your career change from now on? Do you want to have kids? How will that impact it? Will a company be pro or anti maternity leave? In India, luckily, we still have, maternity leave that's a lot more sorted. But in America, you barely have maternity leave. It ends up being, hugely problematic. So I think that, since we're talking about India, we'll stick to it. Does definitely make a difference that pressure is constantly there. And then you feel very divided between, having to either shuck those pressures or give in to those pressures.
Do you think post Corona situation, these things will change since all the men, all the women are staying together, working together, they're handling the kids together. So do you think will there be any change in the mentality towards this?
I really hope so, because I think that's one of the biggest things that we've learned during this quarantine, not necessarily lockdown, but
yes,
when we've all been self-isolating, and anyone whose company has given them the luxury of being able to work from home versus having to, clock into the office despite everything that's happened, has realized that you can very well be doing everything that you've been doing at home. And I think it's not just about women. I think it can actually, if people let it can change the way we work. It can completely restructure the way we work. You cut office costs out of the equation. You create a situation where anyone can be mobile. You don't have a situation where just because I can't clock into the office and I have work to do. Because, I've had days where I've been stuck because I've had 102 fever and I've needed to do work. So I've taken the day off, but I've worked from home, and that no longer needs to happen. The work you do is then accounted for. And I feel like it definitely will make a big difference if people let it, for women in the workplace as well. Because if you have the luxury of being able to stay home and, be able to do the things that you put your career aside for while also having a career, that's fantastic. And I really hope that really hope that difference happens and it's seen.
Yeah, because I think it kind of works, because if somebody has the luxury of choosing if they want to go to office or working from home, then it would work. But a compulsory coming to office or a compulsory work from home, I think would not change the way that the workplace representation is right now. Because for a lot of women who kind of give up on their work, I don't think they can work from their home, because even then they'll be expected to take a lot more work than they usually would have to. And similarly, if somebody has to go to office, again, those two being compulsory may not be beneficial as to what we are looking for in diversity. But yes, having the luxury of choosing either one of them would help. So one more thing that I wanted to ask you regarding this is, do you think that due to such factors that women may have to give up their work, or there are even cases where I know that women have given up their jobs voluntarily. They were not asked to, but they gave it up voluntarily, and just because they wanted to move with their spouses. So, do you think those kind of situations have led to a pay parity, or is it entirely due to something else? Because right now, in a recent study, it was said that for every 77 cents that a woman earns, a man earns $1.
That makes perfect sense to me. To be very honest, and I'm going to say this purely from a very personal opinion point of view, I believe that women are paid less, and employers try to hire less women when they can, simply because there's still. I'm not talking about more evolved organizations. I've worked at a lot of those evolved organizations, but there are a lot of organizations that believe that there are more risks associated with hiring a woman. They believe that there is a chance that she could need 8 months of maternity leave and she could get pregnant and she would be able to take on less work. And there are all sorts of things that come into play that they will not look at for a man. And this becomes, to those companies, a justification for not paying a woman for often doing more work than a man in the same job. Because for women, you constantly, again, I'm coming from a personal point of view. I feel like most women feel that they need to prove themselves more because the odds are stacked against them. You will, I can't tell you how many times I've gone to work when I'm feeling unwell or I've gone to work, when I'm cramping or something, because you don't want a situation where, somebody uses that against you. But with men, I don't think that these things even factor in. So I feel like that definitely becomes an issue, because it then no longer becomes about the work that somebody is putting in or how capable somebody is. It becomes about what you as an organization believe are risks associated with bringing a woman on board. And sadly, I think one of the things that's also become an issue in recent times is women and sexual harassment, and companies not being able to tackle the issue in the way in which it's needed. Like for example, I feel like some companies handle it really well. Like, I've worked at 2 places where you've had those seminars, you've sat people down and you've made them take tests and you've made them understand that this is the behavior that, constitutes inappropriate behavior. And these are the lines that you absolutely should never be able to cross. And I feel like that's really important, but I feel like these organizations are the exception, they're not the rule. Most places are not really going to bring it up. I can think of 3 or 4 organizations that are notorious for women quitting because they have been harassed, and they don't know what to do about it, And I have had conversations with those places, and I've not gone to work at them, because this has been something that has been at the back of my mind, which is that, heaven forbid, you're ever in a situation you don't have an HR structure or an employer that takes you seriously, and you're stuck. So to me, that is one of the things that I look into. When I look at taking a job, and every job I've taken, I've looked into what their HR policies are about things like this, because it is important, and it's not something most men will think about, but women have to constantly think about this as part of, because if you are working late nights in an organization and God forbid something is to happen where you are stuck in an unseemly situation, you need to know that somebody has your back.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then that is definitely a black mark against the company, and I would rather not work there than take that job. But again, a lot of people don't have that luxury. A lot of women will take the job because it seems like a good opportunity, or a lot of women will not be aware of the fact that these risks are associated with taking this job. So I feel like all of these things tend to factor in terms of both companies hiring women because they feel like, it's just easier, quote unquote, easier to hire men, and a lot of women deciding and having to weigh the kind of jobs we take with very different parameters than a man would. A man simply has to say, do I like this job? Is the money good? The end. But with a woman, she has to say, how far is this place from where I live? Will I be safe coming back if I'm doing late nights? What happens if, my folks keep pushing me and I do eventually have to get married, and will I be able to continue to balance this out with that? It's different for every woman, but there are a lot of very similar things that a lot of us take into account when we're taking something on.
That's actually pretty true, because what I saw during the recent the series that went around, like with women coming out and reporting what had happened to them in the workplaces, most of the workplaces that these things happened were where somebody who was in a prominent position in a company where it wasn't, how to put this, but it was strongly male dominated at the top, or it wasn't what you call a big organization, somewhere around, somewhere it had like 100 to 500 people, and it was kind of run in a manner that is equal to somebody being a showman. So in company like that I work in that like Aditya works in, we actually have good laws about this. We have sessions, we have seminars, we have to take, I think every year there's a mandatory course that we have to undertake as to what entails harassment, what are the steps that you can report harassment.
Yeah.
I mean, there are serious steps that have been taken, but these are the companies that are established in multiple countries.
Yeah.
So, but even then, I think there are companies, there are MNCs that kind of don't look upon very kindly when it comes to promotion or pay raises, when they know that the women that they're going to give the raise to, or if they have to send her to on-site. So on-site in IT means that somebody has to go and work on the client side, which is generally out of India, and that means a lot more opportunities and a lot better package. So those sort of opportunities sort of pass women by because the employers or the managers believe that giving an opportunity to a woman who's pregnant, like she may not like we'll give her the opportunity and then after 2 months she'll be on leave with the higher package at the with the opportunities that she's going to have. So despite having such measures in various MNCs, I've heard stories where women have been passed upon just because she was pregnant or she was not given a raise or a promotion because they knew that she's going to go on a maternity. So I think even if you take a lot more steps, a lot more seminars and everything, there's still going to be cases where such things are going to happen.
Because the thing is, so, ultimately, I'm sorry, I know I'm cutting you off, but I think that it's that was it. Restructuring of the way people think that needs to happen. Because the biggest thing that needs to happen is that, I mean, believing or hoping that every woman that goes out to work is safe is something that, of course, every woman is hoping for every day. But in the long run, you know, it's something that you hope for in the long run. It's not a change that's going to happen in like 3 days, that tomorrow I walk out in Delhi at 11 o'clock and I can feel safe. It's not going to happen right now. But I think that one thing that definitely does need to change in workplaces is that, and that change will probably have to start coming, it should start coming from families, is that a woman's career needs to be given as much importance. It just needs to. It starts with families as well, because if you have a structure where a woman feels like I can have a child and I can have a family, but I will be able to share the burden of these things with the person that I'm with. I will have a partner and not a husband, you know, that I have to cook for and clean for. And I mean, like I hear of so many people, and I'm very lucky that I'm in a space where A, I don't have kids, right? B, I am married, but I have in-laws that don't live in the city and are understanding people. I have a husband who, you know, sort of partners with me. He shares the work. So even, for example, during something like a lockdown, I was cooking, he was cleaning. But a lot of men are not like that. A lot of men will come home from work and take off their shoes and watch TV. But a lot of women will come home from work and make dinner for their husband, which is really problematic because, you know, I mean, either you have a situation where neither of you makes dinner or both of you make dinner. Or either you have a situation...
I think I like to correct you here. Yeah, I like to correct one term here. You've said a lot of women. I don't think it's a lot of women. I think it's nearly every woman.
Yeah, it's
nearly everyone.
And which is why I feel like very often I feel like I shouldn't be qualified to say these things, because I have the privilege of I have the privilege of being in workspaces that have put women forward. I have the privilege of being with somebody who shares the workload. But luckily, not luckily, but I happen to know enough people that go through what we're talking about to be able to at least be able to say something on their behalf, because it's not like they're going to be able to in the situations that they're in. It's very difficult to speak up about an organization when you're in it, you know, and it's very difficult to speak up about a bad marriage when you're in it, or what is considered a very normal marriage in India, where it's like, yeah, I mean, of course, you know, you're coming home and you're looking after him. That's perfectly normal, as long as he doesn't hit you, all is well, you know. Hey, he's not an alcoholic.
That's the perfect husband by Indian standards, you know. He's not irritating, so he's the best husband there is.
It's so problematic, it's so scary. So I feel like that, until that happens and until that change comes from men, where men say that if we want to have a child, we will be having a child. You will not be having a child for me. You know what I mean? Like, it then becomes that you split up everything. You split up doctor's appointments, you split up PTAs, you split up who's going to pick them up from school or who's going to go running if one of them is hurt. You know, it's not just call mommy all the time. And because right now the structure is call mommy, women constantly feel like you're carrying two very different heavy weights, because at work nobody's going to really understand that you have that going on at home. Most workplaces don't particularly care. I mean, now in 2020 workplaces are becoming, you know, a little bit more sensitive, or even understanding something as simple as period cramps were like dismissed as like this, but it's a period cramp. And now people are realizing that it's medical level pain, you know. It's the period cramps are like number 4 on the list of most painful things after labor and toothaches and one more thing that I've forgotten, you know. And I think it took somebody, I think it took Sophia Bush articulating it and saying it's like being kicked in the nuts for 3 days, you know, for men to understand that, oh, okay, it's actually painful, you know. So I think that a lot of it is a lot of gaps are slowly, very slowly being bridged. But until I think men understand the role that they play in this, and the fact that if you're continuing to sit there and let the woman in your life have a full career and struggle with trying to manage the family on her own, or if you're making her give up a lucrative career, if she wants to do it on her own and you figure out a partnership where you know you're the breadwinner and you can take care of things and she's okay with that because she's taking care of things at home, then that's fine. But if you pushed her into giving up a career to take care of her family, I think it's time that men start reassessing, you know, the way that they function or the things that they expect out of marriage. Like, I don't know if you've seen this Netflix show that's been doing the rounds, Indian matchmaking. You?
Oh, dude, I've seen that day one.
And you know,
Day
people
one.
were so offended.
It's so cringeworthy and
People were so
regressive.
offended. But you know, the thing is that I actually thought that show was spot on, because I was like, you're getting upset because it's true.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
the reason Indians are losing
Yeah,
their
because
mind
Yes.
is because all of this is true.
Because
I
it's
have been told by, you
True.
know, like
Yes.
relatives that I've met before I was married, I was told that like, oh, you'll get married very easily because you're thin and you're fair. And I was like, I will be a terrible daughter-in-law to anyone. Okay, so like, you cannot make this assessment. So my point is that this is how it functions. It's that superficial, it's that regressive. You know, you have people like that man's mother who essentially wants somebody who will cook and clean for her son and live by her rules. That is the space that a lot of Indian women are tackling, you know, and not a lot of people on that show were lower middle class or, you know, people, and it's significantly worse in those spaces. This is, you're dealing with the upper middle class and you still have this regressive mindset.
I'll recommend a show. I think it's called A Suitable Bride or A Suitable Girl. I'm not sure, but it follows a story of who are like trying to get married. So it's like it tries and capture the essence of how exactly arranged marriages work in India and how painful it is to process. But I think for the Indian matchmaking, if you think about it, the two women that they try and show as being, you know, very high demanding and not in a good light are actually the two women who are pretty independent and given the freedom by the family. That was Aparna and Ankita. Right? And they were not quite shown in a very good light.
I really liked Ankita, but I did not like Aparna because
Yeah.
I feel like there's no excuse for being an asshole.
Yeah, I mean, of
No,
course,
I get
like
it. I understand.
her mother was on an entirely new level. But I mean, I forgave her for that because I think she was brought up by the mother thinking that way.
Yeah,
So I think in a way it's okay. I mean, she was shown as the villain of the show because she was the highest, like, in her demands and expectations. But I think Ankita was the best representation of what exactly a woman has to do.
Agreed. You know, I think that to me, her not a character, she's a real person, but she made a lot of sense because she was somebody that I could relate to. I could completely understand, you know, this idea of, you know, I have things that are important to me, and why should I be expected to put a business that I've built or my life or my family or all of the things that are important to me and put them, you know, aside to be able to cater to somebody else's needs, you know. Either it goes, and this is how I feel about a lot of, you know, I essentially feel this way about every aspect of a partnership, including something like a Karwa Chauth, which is like a very regressive tradition, right? That either you both do it or neither of you does it. It's that simple. I'm not fasting for you if you're not going to fast for me, buddy. You know? I just think that...
I mean, beta, aapko thoda to adjust karna hoga na.
Oh God, Seema auntie for the win. But yeah, I
so
think that,
do you think
sorry, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, the way that we perceive media as such, I mean, I was trying to think as to how many women-centric movies that have come out in recent years and how many of them have actually gone on to do well. And I mean, every movie that we can count on our hand, like, are the movies that have done well, but we won't even remember the movies that have not done well with the women-centric lead. I mean, I don't like. Do you think that there is a problem as a media industry, as an entertainment industry, that women being portrayed as the lead may not lead to the revenue as such?
I think that, are you talking about Bollywood?
Yeah, I mean, not just Bollywood, but Bollywood, Hollywood,
Because
any
Bollywood,
kind
I
of.
feel like it's a very different ballgame. But if I'm talking about like content on Netflix and stuff, then I feel like that's a very different space. But Bollywood, yes.
No,
Bollywood,
I
to put it
I
very
particularly
simply,
mean.
the fact that Salman Khan can still sell out like 1 million theaters, to me just shows you where the Indian audience in terms of Bollywood is. You know, like it's not about women-centric
Yeah.
films. It's about the fact that you're still willing to, you know, put your money on this one particular not terribly great actor. Okay, who you might want to cut this out.
I'll
because
forward
I'll
you.
get in
I'll
trouble.
forward you a link. I'll forward you a link by Satyajit Ray after this.
Yeah.
And what Satyajit Ray is doing is that he's being interviewed by a French journalist, and he's just sitting there. And it's a very good interview that I think everyone should listen to. And there's one particular segment that he's been asked about, and he goes like, I think in a way, Indian audience has not evolved. They are not evolved for the kind of cinema I'm making and I want to make.
Absolutely.
And due to that, I am being
It
restricted.
makes sense.
And this was when he said it 90s or 80s. I'm not sure when he did say that, but I kind of agree. I mean, even now, like, so my basic pretext of asking this question was any movie that comes to the theaters, not on OTT platforms. Those are like way too liberal
Yeah.
as compared to what we have right now in Hollywood or even like Bollywood. Like movies like Thappad or like Queen, they were like supremely good, but the amount of money that they made was like so disappointing. Is that like Salman Khan with a Race 3 made more than like 2 of such movies
I
combined,
think that
and that is
I
like very
think that to a
disheartening.
great degree, I feel like it's because a lot of people that go for these films are going for something
Yeah.
else. They're not necessarily going to sort of, you know, be enlightened or be educated or, you know, like I know a lot of,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to demean the audience, a lot of very bright people I know who are, you know, like sending me links to great articles, you know, in the New Yorker or whatever, are also going and watching,
Mhm.
you know, like these very masala films that I would never have associated them with. Because when they're going, I
True.
think Bollywood is, you know, like also there is a lot of films that work simply because it's the kind of thing that you can take your family to. You know, maybe you can't take your family to Thappad, you know, or you can't take that's the problem, that until it's something
Yeah.
that's like a quote unquote family entertainer, which, you know, you can still kind of in India we have a huge issue with sex, but we're totally okay with violence. So you can have somebody beating up like 45 guys till their teeth break and, you know, they're bloody in the mouth, and that's chill. Like everyone can go watch that on a Sunday, but you can't have somebody showing someone, you know, like you can't have two people kissing on screen because high trauma. So I think that is a big part of it. And the thing is that I feel like I still do feel like while that contingent of movies definitely still exists, I feel happy about the fact that like okay, so one director that I think always does fantastic stuff, and even her not well received movies I like very much, which is Zoya, right? I loved Made in Heaven. I loved even Dil Dhadakne Do, which I don't know how many people like. I really like that movie. I've seen it multiple times. So I feel like it's really nice that she can exist. It's really nice that she can make a movie like Gully Boy and that it can pack out theaters, and it shows me that the audience somewhere is evolving, you know, like they are not, I wouldn't go so far as to say that like, you know, like a really really crappy whatever, you know, like bubblegum pop kind of film won't work anymore and that era is past. But at the same time, that, you know, her films, Gully Boy was a hit. I'm happy that something like a Kapoor and Sons did well, because Kapoor and Sons was a very watchable movie, but it was also a good movie. It had well-crafted characters, it had good actors,
right?
You know, and I feel happy that like movies like that can do well, you know, and that they have a space now. Or like I saw this movie recently called Karva with
that's pretty good movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie. I objectively tried to watch it and I tried to find problems with it and I couldn't, you know. It was a good movie.
A lot of people did, apparently. A lot of people did. They thought the movie was slow and the humor they found was deadpan, which I don't think was the case. I liked the movie. I liked the pace.
But
I
I'm
liked the
glad
setting
that
that
movie
movie
could
was
be
in.
made, because like 10
Yeah.
years ago, they would have shut that movie down. And I think that's why, these streaming platforms have been very exciting, because at the end of the day, you may not find that appreciation in a theater, but you put it on an Amazon or a Netflix, and when people have access to it, they'll watch it, you know. And
That's true.
I feel like that has changed a lot, because I'm not somebody who likes going to the theater. I really don't. So there are very few movies I'll go to the theater for, unless there's something like a Dark Knight or whatever, which I feel is like a theater experience,
Yeah.
But I will watch it. I watch a lot of movies and a lot of TV at home. So there's been a lot of good things that I've been exposed to, because we've come on these platforms, which would have lost me if they'd only been released in theaters. And I think that the one good thing that's happening is that barrier is being broken as well. And I feel like on these streaming platforms, women-centric shows and women-centric movies are now starting to do a lot better. Like, I think a great example is Mrs. Maisel, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
Yeah.
Wins Emmys every year,
Yes.
and it's doing so well, and that show is irrefutably about her. It's about her pushing back at a time in a male-dominated space, and there are times where there are some very sexist moments on that show, and it's absolutely accurate, because if you took the sexism out of that time, it would not be real. If you made like something like a Mad Men, a non-sexist show, it would not be real. It wouldn't be believable. So I feel happy at least that content is starting to. It may take a while for that content to do really well, on screen, on whatever the silver screen. But it's doing well on streaming platforms. So that to me is still a beacon of hope.
Yeah, I mean, if we look about how the shows have been increasing, I mean, we have Marvelous Miss Maisel, then we have Fleabag, we have we have like even at home, we can see that Anushka Sharma is producing some really great content with regards to, like, I think she's balancing out with one male dominant, one female dominant. I think she's doing that sort of stuff. But I think, do you also believe that the women who are actually leading such kind of shows are more prone to hate on social medias? Like, for example, we'll have Taapsee Pannu, who may say something and she'll be like hounded for it on social media, like regardless of even if it makes sense or not.
100%.
We'll have.
I believe that it takes a lot more for an actor, a female actor, to be able to say something and know that she will get shut down for it than it does for a male actor, because the kind of hate that you get is very different. It's not just the amount of hate, which I agree, it's often more. It's the kind of hate. Like, the best example is that female comic right now who went viral, who made those jokes about the statue, and the threat that came her way. And I saw the video of that threat, and it curdled my blood. Like, it was terrifying. And the truth is that any woman who's I have the luxury of being able to hide behind my, screen. Like, I can put an article out there and I will get hate, but I'm still, unless you take the effort to look me up and find me on social media or whatever, I'm anonymous compared to, somebody like that female comedian, or, a Taapsee Pannu or whatever it is, who's out there. She's visible, she's, and it's terrifying. It's terrifying, the kind of things that you will hear, the things that, men are not going to encounter that. They're simply, no man is going to threaten another man with rape. I've not seen it happen. I could be wrong, and I'm very willing to be proven wrong. But, it's
that doesn't happen.
With women, it's a regular thing. It's something that you know that you're going to be, aspersions are going to be cast on, oh, you're this, you're that, and this is what I'll do to you, and this is how I'll screw up your life.
No, wait, one thing happens. Yeah, the man is not threatened with it. His family is threatened with it.
And usually it's the women in his family.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's terrifying that even as a tool to threaten a man, what you're threatening is the women in his life. Because no man will directly threaten another man straight up. He won't say, I will come and I will slice your head open with a katana. He will not say that. He will say, I will come and do that to your wife or your mother. So for women, it becomes doubly terrifying to put yourself out there, because it's one thing to, read trolls who say, oh my God, you suck, you're a D grade actor, whatever. And it's another thing to read the kind of vicious and frightening threats that women are exposed to. So yeah, I agree. I think that it takes a lot more out of these women, and the fact that they continue to do it, and the fact that they continue to not be fazed by it, says a lot. Because it is very, very tiring. It is very, very tiring. It is very, very scary. It is very, very draining to be exposed to all of that and still continue to power on and say that, the people that I'm getting through to matter enough for me to continue to put up with all this.
We've had a incredibly great discussion about this. We've discussed wide range of issues. We've discussed everything. I like to we've taken a lot of your time as well. I like to ask one more thing.
Yeah.
That is, do you think that even when the men are in minority in upper management, they have an upper hand with regards to their opinions? And this is just not to any place that you've worked, but the stories that you've heard. Also, I have one more question related to this. I'll ask after.
To be very honest, it's something that I can only assume, because I don't really know about it enough to be able to be qualified to comment on it. But I mean, just as somebody who reads and consumes content and tries to understand, how this sort of workplace hierarchy and pay disparity and all works in various organizations, not just in various industries, not just my own. I think that it's definitely obviously coming from a level of truth, because if it wasn't, we wouldn't have these many women rising up and saying something about it, because it's uncomfortable to talk about. It's always uncomfortable to talk about money. It's always uncomfortable to talk about, the fact that you're not being promoted. And the people who are brave enough to do it, if they're doing it, then I truly believe that it must be happening. I'm going to give 5% leeway and say maybe there are 5% of people who feel scorned for other reasons, right? But I believe there's a majority of people who, if they're talking about this, they know that they're putting themselves in, danger of being deemed unemployable and, a troublemaker or a rabble-rouser or whatever it is. But they're doing it anyway, because there's a cause.
Do you think that when women are actually demanding what the men demand, for example, if a man goes up and says, I want to raise, and when a woman goes up and says, I want to raise, do you think that there's a kind of a slanderous statements that are being made out by the men, or even the women, who says that she's not worthy of it, or that she's used some other means? Because I've heard it twice while I was traveling in cabs, where the cab driver told me that the guy before said that somebody else got a promotion over that chap, and that girl was not capable enough. We wonder how she got it, and the way that the guy or the driver said it, it kind of made it obvious what they were kind of implying.
No, I get it.
So do you think?
Yeah. I think
so do you think that is
very easy? It's a very easy go-to for a lot of men who can't deal with the fact that a woman has been promoted over them, right? Because what's the easiest way to slander a woman and make her feel bad about it? It's this.
True.
It's making somebody feel like, you got this promotion because you did something untoward. You got this promotion because you're attractive. You got this promotion because, you flirted with somebody or whatever it is. But and that's exactly why I feel like women are, like I said, you're trying so much harder to prove yourself. You'll kill yourself twice as much at a certain job, because not only do you need to do your job, but you need to prove that you got here because you can do your job.
True.
You have to prove that. I think it's hard for people, who are in a space where I'm sure it's, and in this country, I'm definitely sure it's harder for single women, because I know that, I can't talk about, in this case, I'm not talking about workplaces, but in general, I know that people's perception towards me, everything from landlords that I've rented things to guys at bars, has changed the minute I got married. The minute you're married, you're somebody's wife. So there is a level of respect, because you now legally belong to a man. Right?
It's like you're a property that has been
exactly. And when you're single, it's like if anybody can cast aspersions about, how you got what you got or what you did to get where you were.
True.
And what you did to get where you were will never simply be hard work. It takes a bigger, and I truly believe that, there's a lot of talk about like women are women's biggest enemies, but I've actually never encountered that. I really haven't. Like, I'm sure those women are there. I'm sure that there is again a 5% of people who are like that.
Yeah, I've known a few.
Every woman that I have known, okay, unless she was in direct competition with me, in which case it's just human nature to compete, right? Every woman I've known in workspaces has helped push them, like, or other women up to a great degree. Like I know times where I've had a breakdown or like been on the verge of a breakdown because I've had a lot of stress, and it's the women of the office that have held me together, or I've held women of the office together, and we pulled them aside and we bolstered their spirits, and we've been like, it's okay, we will get through this, I've known women to come up to me and say that, like, I've known women to come up to each other and ask and say that, I have a lot on my plate, do you think you can help? And I've helped, and vice versa. So I especially believe that when it's like this kind of slanderous rumor, I truly believe that it's usually meant for behaving. Somewhere or the other, there is a man who was insecure about the fact that he couldn't get something. And
I'll agree. I'll agree with this completely.
That thing, right? Where it's like, oh, you got hit by a girl is supposed to be an insult. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, they gave the promotion to a girl over you.
Yeah.
And it's hugely problematic that you're not looking at this person as an equal. You're already looking at them from, an elevated position where you believe that you're better simply by virtue of being a man. And that's why it stings even more that she got the promotion. And rather than simply say that maybe she works harder, she's better at it, or whatever, it's easier to say that, oh, she gave him something that I couldn't. It's very problematic.
So what should be the policy approach in this regard? Like for all these.
Like I said, I think that it's. There are some organizations that are particularly vicious. There are some organizations that are actually not toxic when it comes to this. I think it's also sad that a lot of places need to be primarily women-led for women to feel safe. Like, I felt safe at all three of my organizations. It's been mostly women, and that's why I know that I felt safe and I felt comfortable. But it's sad that it needs to be like that for me to feel comfortable. Like, I should be equally comfortable in a space where, there are 10 men on my team and 5 women on my team. But I think that the change honestly needs to come. It needs to come from women, where it needs to come from men, where they realize that, or they start having the ability to being okay. Like, they need to be okay with being perceived as I don't know what the right word is. I just drop the macho act.
Equal?
Equal.
Yeah, I mean, just equal. Like, I mean, yeah.
Be able to sort of be okay with saying, yeah, I didn't work hard enough.
Being supervised under
I didn't get it because she puts in more hours than me. I didn't get it because she, cracked that campaign and I didn't. I think that when you take the ego, I think that's the phrase I was looking for. I think the ego needs to be checked. When men start being okay with the fact that a woman is doing as well as them or better than them, I think that's when, because honestly, like for women, I feel like they're trying really hard. Like, most women are, putting a lot of effort into trying to be better than they need to be at their jobs because they feel like they have more to prove. And I feel like that's really sad because that really shouldn't be the world that we live in, that a woman feels like I have to work extra hard. And for me, it's like I said, women-centric space, so I don't feel it as much. But if I was a lawyer working, at like a big Delhi law firm, would I feel constantly insecure and threatened and bothered all the time? Yeah, probably.
Exactly. So we'll just close this here. We'll do a second part if you're interested. We'll do it whenever you're free. Because I thought the conversation was pretty interesting.
Same here. I had a very good time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences and giving us your time. It was really, really
I had
great.
a very good conversation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya.
So much.
Thank you,
Take care.
Soumya.